Perfect. Well, hey, thanks everyone for joining. So welcome to Managing Software Teams in Seattle's meetup. Do this virtually. And the meeting's being recorded. All right, so I'll go through logistics since we started a little late. Do this pretty quickly. But we're gonna spend a few minutes just overview what we do and why we do it here and why we're together. We'll introduce the guest speaker, Paige, and give him about 30 minutes to chat. And then we may break into small groups. We're already kind of in a small group, but and then we'll have some Q&A and discussion afterwards. All right, so everyone's super duper familiar with virtual meetings at this point. Okay, but feel free to ask clarifying questions as you go. If you want to put your video up, that'd be great. It's great to see people. All right. The reason we started this meetup group, is kind of an interesting origin story. I went to a meetup where Ron was presenting, and he did was saying a lot of things that I agreed with and had seen in the software development world. I have a different background. I think everyone here is an engineer at some aspect. I was an Air Force pilot and got into the Agile Scrum game, the Scrum Master and product and Agile coach. And I saw kind of a gap in leadership from what we were doing in the military. And I realized like people were getting promoted into leadership positions, but they never really got trained or coached on how to do it. And it's different when you're a individual contributor to now you're managing and leading a team. So I started a consulting firm that does essentially that, Form 100 Consulting. We staff Scrum Masters and product owners, and we're all former military officers. And so we bring that skill set into software teams. And I reached out to Ron and said, look, I think we could start something to help support the engineering manager group out in the Seattle area. And then Ron wrote the book on it, so it made it real easy to partner up. So he gave me the street cred, and it worked out. Okay, so and so we have a meetup group. It's on Meetup. All right, we'll drop the link in here and when we send this out. But we've already got about 130 people signed up. This is where we post notifications. We don't spam people, right? It's really just a place for us to get the word out. All right, so but yeah, with that, I'll pass it over here to Ron, and floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, so and I had been in California. So Ron Lichty, I live in both California and Washington. I live in both San Francisco and Seattle, specifically, both of those two cities. And I had been part of leading a Silicon Valley engineering leadership community. And when Nate and I put our heads together and said, "Oh, let's do that up here," that sounded like a lot of fun and a lot of opportunity. So there's a little bit of background on me. I've been around a few more than 25 years. I did start as a programmer, and my co-author of Managing the Unmanageable, that's the first edition on the left, the second edition on the right. My co-author sent me something differentiating programmers and software engineers, and it had like 3 different things about each one of them. And I looked at all 6 of them and said, "Oh, I've been all 6 of those." that makes sense to me. I think I've been there. So the challenges of managing software development are of leading, of not being micromanaging, of being helpful and enabling and nurturing, and all of those things are what Mickey and I poured into our book, and what Nate and I have poured into trying to create with this meetup. So what's on the next slide? Oh, there's the book. Yeah, so you can get 35% off with that code. Take a picture of it before Nate turns the page, because you should turn the page. So before we introduce Paige, though, I want to do a quick poll. So you should all be looking at the poll. Have you ever been on a team that practiced programming? And I think that the three of us who are hosts don't get to vote.
Can you define what you mean by practice programming? You mean like we engage in the practice of computer programming, or do you mean do we have deliberate practice sessions about our programming? The latter.
Deliberate practice sessions, which is what Paige's talk is about to be about.
Yep.
Have you had deliberate practice sessions that do not have to do with writing code for production, but have to do with getting better at coding? How's that, Paige?
That's right. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm trying to mash the button. It won't let me.
All right. All right. So we've got 3 people in, and that may be how many people we've got here. So let me end the poll and say that 2 of you answered yes, and 1 answered no. So that's very interesting. So you're at about 2/3, Paige, with your talk. So Paige, I met Paige when I went to Agile Open Northwest. I had just begun living in Seattle in addition to San Francisco 5 or 6 years ago, and wangled my way into a ticket into Agile Open because they were hard to come by at the last minute, and I'd only been in town for 3 weeks at the point at which it happened, and I got one of those tickets. And Paige was giving a talk on fast Agile, and I thought I knew everything about Agile, and then I discovered that I didn't. That there was definitely one approach to doing Agile I didn't know about, and that was fast Agile. And I've been curious about and fascinated by fast Agile ever since. Paige and also here is Steve Quo. The 2 of them together are co-chairs of Code Crafters, or Seattle Code Crafters, or something yes. Very similar to that. Don't hesitate to post that meetup into the chat as well. And I've been to a number of their meetups, primarily, but well, I don't know. I was going to say primarily before the pandemic, but you went virtual too, and I've been to some of those. Mm-hmm. And it's a fun meetup. And then Paige has been an advocate of Agile programming, not just Agile practice. How's that? So I'll let you take it from there, Paige.
Great.
Do we have another slide before we go there? Nope, we did the poll question.
All right. So good evening. My name is Paige Watson. I'm a technical coach with Industrial Logic, and that means that I talk and coach on not just practices and being agile and that sort of thing, but I also focus a lot on how we write good software and how that interacts with our processes, right? So object-oriented design and test-driven development and all that sort of thing. So tonight, let's see if I can start sharing here. Is this going to work again? Nope. Let's see. Hold on. Gonna get it. There we go.
Just do what you did the 5th time before.
Are we seeing it now?
We are.
Fabulous. Okay. So I'm going to talk on deliberate practice, and unfortunately my friend Steve Quo dropped. I hope he'll be back. He actually got me started down this road. He's the super smart one. I just sort of pick up the stuff and run with it. But the idea of deliberate practice is, I'll get into it more, but is on focusing on learning just small things. And I need to get that to move. There we go. There we go. All right. So first I want to start out, there's a bunch of myths around learning, and I think it's really important to at least call a couple of them out. The first one is that practice is only for beginners, which it's not. Musicians, athletes, doctors, they all practice. It's called a practice for a reason, right? Musicians will continue to practice until, not that they don't make a mistake, but they can't, right? So professionals will practice their entire career, right? The second is that you get better by doing, right? If I ask you how many words a minute you type, I'm probably in the good high 40s, but I've been typing for years, decades, why don't I type faster if I just get better by doing it? Sure, you get a little better, but you don't get really, you don't grow, you don't, really pick up skill unless you actually spend time practicing. And the third one is that practice makes perfect, which is, it sounds nice, but as again, my friend Steve Coe points out, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And that if you practice something badly over and over, you're going to do it badly. Right. So one of the things that I want to sort of bring to the forefront is, how do we practice perfectly? And usually I'm not going to get there yet. Usually we apply like a deliberate practice type of rule, and deliberate practice isn't the end all be all, but it works really well for me. So so as a manager, right, I like to ask, what percentage of the week do you give your teams to learn and grow, sort of outside of their production work? And I mean, not outside of work, but during that 40-hour a week time frame. And just think about this, because I think it's really important that we think about how long that's going to take, and how long we give our teams, how much we want to invest in them and their ability to grow and get better at their craft. And Ron, you'll notice I've switched this around a little bit because I'm sort of talking to a more manager heavier, a group. I'm going to start with outcomes, because for some reason my manager always wants to see outcomes. And so some of the things you get from practice, really good practice, right? For your company, you get personal growth of your employees. Your employees love to get better. Part of that, the motivation 3.0, if you're familiar with Daniel Pink and his talk, mastery is one of them, right? People who are able to learn and grow at work will enjoy their work. They will increase their productivity, not only because they're enjoying it, but because they're growing, they're learning new things, they're passing that knowledge around, they have a higher job satisfaction. There becomes a team cohesion when you practice together. You learn together, and it makes you stronger as a group. And so when your work gets harder, you actually come together as a group and sort of tackle it more than just like, if you're not doing that, there's less of that cohesion. And then you also get a psychological safety, and that aspect is, it becomes okay to say, I don't know. I don't know leads to, but I can find out. But we can learn. We can go, it's all right. So that's really important for your company. What do you get out of it for your product, your code? You get software quality, really. The more that I practice, the more that my teams are learning together and practicing, the better their code gets, which means it's more extensible. It's easier to change, right? There's a better code understanding, which means it's more scannable. Someone who's new to the company can come in and look at it and at least sort of understand where it's going because of the way it's set up, as opposed to seeing it and going, I don't know what's going on here, right? You start to get better strategies, like strategy patterns. We practice strategy patterns in some of our learning times, and we'll go back to the desk and we'll sit down and look at the code, and it'll be like, oh, here's that thing we were just practicing. Maybe we could try applying it here, right? Or naming's a great one. We practice naming, and really there's a practice there. What is the better name for this variable or this method? Let's talk about it. Let's practice writing good method names. You go back to your desk and you sit down and you look at the code and you go, I don't know why I called this do stuff. It's a terrible name, right? So your code becomes better. Your code base becomes better. It's more extensible. It's easier to work with, but within the team and across the teams, and as you bring more people on. So that's really important. And then I talked about the emergence of team knowledge, which is that rising tide effect. You start to not have one person who knows it all or is the most important, because everybody starts to learn it. You'll also hear that as the bus number or the lottery number, right? Also, just jump in if you guys have questions as well. I don't want to just barrel through this, but I am going to try and get a lot of information in the time that I have. So let's talk a little about the science of why we learn and how we learn, right? So there's a thing called the learning performance distinction, and it has to do with behaviorism, and it stresses that difference between our learning when we're learning a behavior and actually performing it, right? When we're learning, we're spending more time, we have a diminished output or production. Our output isn't as good as it would be. It's not, the quality might not be there, but we're putting permanent knowledge into our brain. We're growing that permanent knowledge versus performing, we have increased production, of course, and we do have temporary short-term gains in knowledge, but we have a very diminished long-term knowledge growth, right? And so this is why you don't get better just by doing. Well, you do a little bit. That's that temporary increase. You learn little things here and there. But if I asked you to maybe if you could type, say, 200 words a minute in the next 2 months, and I gave you $2 million if you could, you wouldn't just go out and continue typing, right? You would actually, go get a tutor, get a program. You would follow the program and ADS, all that sort of thing. You'd really focus on learning, but your production would go way down, but your long-term knowledge would grow because of that. So I'll talk a lot about learning performance distinction as I go. I think it's really important to remember. A lot of this knowledge, this stuff I talk about, comes from a book by K. Anders Ericsson called Peak: The Secrets of the New Science of Expertise. He deliberately, or he talks about deliberate practice, the rules, and I think I heard that he wrote this sort of as a response to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, which is, again, sounds nice, like the practice makes perfect. 10,000 hours, yes, you get a lot better if you spend that time, but again, it's not the time, it's the quality. So the other book is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I like this one a lot. It's a book about how we think. It's not a raging drama thriller, whatever, but totally recommend it if it's interesting to you. He talks about our two brains. He talks about our fast brain and our slow brain. The fast brain is that instinctive, emotional. I say it when I say to you, Donald Trump, you immediately have a reaction, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, that doesn't matter, but you have a reaction, an emotional one. Same like when you touch something hot, you instinctively make a movement, right? That's your fast brain. Your slow brain is deliberate and logical. When I ask you the product of 12 times 5, you think of it, and you might think of it quickly, but that's your slow brain kicking in to actually do the work and do that logical thinking. What I really want to get out of this learning and this deliberate practice is I want to move my coding, not even necessarily my coding ability, but I want to move a lot of my understanding around coding and around the work that we do closer to the fast brain, right? I don't think I can necessarily move things into my fast brain very much, but I want to be able to look at code and make a almost instinctive or emotional a choice about it, or have an thought about it that will lead me in the right direction to writing better code, or when I'm refactoring, or when I'm really working on a hard problem. So we're trying to move from our slow brain into our fast brain. So if deliberate practice is the how, this is definitely the why, right? let's talk about what that practice looks like, right? So there's the 6 rules of deliberate practice, and I'm going to go over them fairly quickly. They are: don't go it alone, right? You need a coach. You need someone who can guide you. You need someone that can answer those questions when you have them, right? Be uncomfortable. Step out of your comfort zone. You're never going to learn anything if it's easy, right? But you're also not going to learn as much if you go way too far, right? So continually banging your head against something that is you just have no idea how to do is not going to get you a lot of knowledge either. So you just want to go a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Pick one thing and have a simple focus, right? That means if I tried to learn to write an OAuth library in Fortran, I'd get nowhere, right? I don't know either of those. The learning curve would be really steep. And not only that, I don't know what IDE to use, and I don't know how OAuth works. And, I'd probably give up long before I even got any positive learning out of it, other than maybe there'd be some reinforcement that I don't know what I'm doing. But so you pick something simpler, you pick something small that you can focus on. I was talking earlier about naming. Let's practice naming. Let's practice don't repeat yourself, or the dry aspect of writing code. Let's practice let's practice doing this kata or whatever with only using objects, right? So we're not going to use integers and strings. We're only going to pass an object in and get it back. We're, all these sort of things, but you pick one thing and you stick to it, right? You need fast feedback. You need fast, clear, and actionable feedback each time you iterate. So if I'm trying to learn something and I'm not getting that fast feedback, I'm not able to incorporate it right away. This is why if you're doing like TDD or micro tests, they're fabulous. You immediately get that feedback about your code and about how your code is manifesting as you're writing it. This is why you want to have that dashboard for like your CI/CD pipelines, right? Yes, there's a little bit of a lag there, but a couple minutes of pushing your code into production and looking at that dashboard versus not really knowing what happened for hours or days, right? You need to get that fast feedback to get better. You need to work where you can fail and learn. And this is really important because oftentimes we'll talk about how we practice and what we're going to work on. And people will be like, oh, well, I could just take this class or this function or something that I've been working on, and we can all practice on that. And you don't want to practice on production work, because you need to step outside of that area to the place where you can fail. You really only learn by failing, right? You need to step out of that area where you have to do well. You have to, like when you're doing production work, I don't really want to make a mistake, right? Even if I say was going to put this on a branch and this will never be checked in, right? But what happens when we actually do that? Our brains go, yeah, well, if we actually do it right, maybe I'll check it in. And the focus goes back to actually thinking about work and not thinking about learning and being okay to fail. And then you have to want to be there. It sounds kind of flippant, but how have you ever been told that you were going to have to go to a mandatory class at work? And how much did you learn? Probably not as much. You probably got there and you were like, okay, this is interesting, and maybe pick up one or two things. Or you're probably like, screw this, I'm gonna stare at my phone all the time and I'm just gonna check in because my boss said I had to be here, right? So you have to want to be there and to learn. Those 6 things are really important. Yeah, any questions or thoughts on those? Okay.
But yeah, I put something in the chat about when you're talking about being able to fail. I mean, immediately think of Formula One race cars, and they have free practice sessions where it's not the race, and so they can push the limits, be able to fail, crash into the wall. They'll fix the car later. So it's really, really good. I really love the way you've gone about and put this together.
It's totally exactly that. It's really important, right? And they can get that fast feedback of like, oh, this corner's coming up. Can I really push it around this corner in this weather today? And they learn something right away, right? They get that, like, either they can or they can't, but then they can apply that later.
There's another one that came to mind, similar. I think it was Chad Fowler's Passionate Programmer book, where he talked about jazz musicians. And he said, yes, you see these professional jazz musicians, and when they get together with each other, they're just jamming. They're not, they're not playing the hits, right? They're not playing just their instrument. When they get on stage, they're playing the crowd pleasers. But when they get to jam with each other, they might switch instruments with each other, or try to play the song backwards, or do all kinds of crazy stuff just to have fun and get better. And that, there's a difference in your occupational. This might be like, my occupational language might be Python, but my go have fun language might be Rust or whatever, right? Like you just, that you gotta try those other things. I think your point number 3 here really resonated with me, because every time I think about going and having fun and practicing, I try to kill too many birds with one stone. It's like you said, I try to learn a new framework, a new language, a new pattern, and it's too much.
Yeah, and it is. And going back to your musician example, right? A professional musician doesn't just go in and play the song. They do when they want to have fun, but if they want to really practice, they focus on, I'm going to play this chord, and I'm only going to play this chord, and then I'm going to think about, am I sustaining it for the right time? Is my fingers in the right place? Do I have the right posture? All that sort of thing. And they're going to focus on that. And then later, when we do the production work, is when we actually put all the chords together to make the music, right? But that's really important, is that we don't try to do too many things. And oftentimes when we're learning or starting out practicing, especially as a group, we do that. We often think, oh, hey, let's rewrite this. Well, like, I don't know Rust. Like, let's write a web server in Rust. I've never done that. Like, okay, I've never written a web server and I've never written Rust. How well is this going to go today? Right. So maybe you start out like, hey, let's just learn how to write FizzBuzz in Rust, and then once we understand that, let's figure out what the next little tiny thing we can learn is. Excellent.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
The comment, and a comment relates to the music examples you guys were just talking about. I took 10 years of piano lessons from 2nd grade through 11th grade, and I couldn't get done with scales fast enough. And so it really stunned me when as an adult, it was probably in the last 10 years, I discovered that there are people who, that professional musicians sit down and play scales. That blew me away. It just, the notion that very thing that I tried to get rid of, the very thing that was core to playing the piano, is still core to professional musicians. So that's the comment. Question is around around that first one. Don't go alone. Yeah. So can you say more about the someone, the guide? So for example, if I had, I think that if I had a list of things to try, like just using objects instead of strings, for example. If I just had a list of those, my team could spend an hour on one of those pretty pretty straightforwardly. What do they get out of a guide?
So I think, well, first, right, when you played piano, you had a guide, right? When you learned to ski, you probably had some sort of guide, a teacher or whatever. When you play soccer or, you know, whatever sport, you have a guide as a coach. When we do this as a team writing code, you know, I'd love to say you need to have a technical coach. That would be awesome. But you don't. You need someone else with knowledge that you can sort of get that feedback from. And that can be a senior person, it can be a junior person, it can be someone else on your team that just has a little more of an understanding about something, or maybe they don't even have an understanding, but you can bounce questions and rules and ideas off them, right? And again, I sort of equate it to, like, I've tried to read a book and, you know, learn things, and I get some understanding from books, but I don't know that I get learning as much from books. And often it's because I'm like, I don't understand what this part is saying here. And then your guide becomes the internet, or, you know, Stack Overflow or something. But I really want someone there that I can go, hey, Ron, what does this mean when it's talking about that? You know, I was reading this, and I know you wrote this, and, you know, what, et cetera, right? You really want to have someone that you can bounce those ideas off, and preferably has a little bit more knowledge so that they can continue to move you forward when you sort of get stuck. Does that help?
When you hit the sports analogy, it immediately resonated. That notion of okay, so I want to move which finger how much when I'm on the golf club. So those people, I mean, I think even the professional golfers have coaches who and
you do, and they stand there and they're like, you know, that was great, but your head came up a little that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
or you know, I turn to them and I'm like, I just don't understand it. I'm doing, you know, I do martial arts. So I'll go to my sensei or a senior student and say, I just don't get it. I'm doing the exact movement that I think I'm seeing everybody. What's, you know, why am I stuck here? Right. That's the guide that you want to have.
Yeah.
Because without that, yes, you could push through. Yes, you could get there, but really your throughput time, your feedback time gets much larger, and then your ability to get that fast feedback and learn, I think, slows down a bit.
Yeah, and I think the martial arts example is really interesting because I spent some time there as well. And one of my teachers, you know, especially when I was young and, you know, ego driven, and maybe I still am, but maybe I've learned a little bit better since then. But, you know, where it took me a while to realize, just because you're the coach doesn't mean you're better than the player, right? Like, that's the thing that I think especially young men, in my experience, have this ego problem where it's like, well, now I'm the pro. I don't need a coach. Like, who's going to be better than me at telling me? And the point that one of my instructors told me years ago was, do you really think that Muhammad Ali's trainer could beat up Muhammad Ali? And I was like, no. It's like, but he still needs someone to take that third person perspective, to be a critical eye, to break it down, to look at the minutia, to help refine everything. And then you start to go, okay, but also his trainer has been in the boxing industry a lot longer than he has, because he's twice his age. So maybe he has some wisdom, some experience, a good eye for things. He might not be the best fighter, but he's still a good coach. And that, to me, when I was young, really helped me get, like, I can get a guy who hasn't been coding as long as me to be my coach. Yeah. It's okay, right? He can still critique me from a perspective that I can't critique myself. And I think that's the huge lesson that it was for me long ago, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay, so let's talk about just a couple of things that I like to use when I teach teams to actually learn together, right? And the first two, Code Katas and Code Dojos, rather close together. A code kata is just a simple problem that you can use over and over. I tend to really like FizzBuzz because it's terribly easy, and and once you solve it once or twice, you never really have to solve it anymore, and you can start to think about, like, how do I apply this? I wonder if we can let's talk about naming. Like I said, let's write a strategy pattern for FizzBuzz and see if we can use the command pattern. Let's do it with no, only passing in classes and only getting out classes and not using any primitives. Let's try writing FizzBuzz in F#. I've never written F#, but I know how to write FizzBuzz. So the small focus change is that we're going to try a different language instead of a different problem. Right. So I really like that one. Code dojos are really good. They're sort of repetitive practices, a lot around refactoring, as I find, and let's talk about how we can refactor this. Let's try it out. Let's refactor it again next time. Let's see what we can do differently or what patterns we can apply there. The third ones are called Sparrow decks, and Sparrow decks come from my friend Llewellyn Falco, who's another fabulous coach. And they are relaxed repetition where you see a picture over and over, and they come because he started out by teaching this using house sparrows and song sparrows. But they slowly get quicker, and the idea is, again, like I talked about, moving from the slow brain to the fast brain. You don't have to be right, but you want to move that idea of getting an answer closer to the fast brain, closer to the front. So, and then some pitfalls that I often run into, and that is the practicing solutions issue. When you get in, when you start practicing, you don't want to practice solutions, which means oftentimes I'll see a team, they'll start learning, they'll be like, what do we want to practice today? Oh, well, we did FizzBuzz last time. Let's do the 100 Doors Kata, or let's do Gilded Rose, right? And they're switching the problem each time, which is great if they want to practice solving things. But if they want to practice something different, you don't want to you don't want to change the problem. Stick with a problem that so that you can, very much like say driving a car. Right? Eventually you stop learning how to drive a car and you start just driving. Then you're looking around, then you're talking to someone else. You're not really thinking about driving the car like you were when you first started. This goes back to Michael Poliani, I think is his name, who said that something becomes a tool when you stop thinking about how to use it. Right? This is very much the same. If we stop thinking about the problem that we're working on and trying to find the solution, we can use it as a tool and start actually, applying it to other things.
And I would say, just to call back to your martial arts nod, and even the word kata comes from there, right? And so I've always loved the term code kata, because in the martial arts, a kata, if you're not a martial artist here, you think of it as like memorizing 50 dance moves or whatever, right?
It's like a practice, yeah. But
you do the same moves every time. When you first learn it, it takes you a long time to memorize all the moves. But once you've done them long enough, it's like driving a car, it's atomic. Now I can say, do the same moves, but this time do them fast. This time do them slow. This time do them left-handed. This time do them right-handed. This time do them backwards. This time do them blindfolded. So there's a lot of different ways, but I'm not working the memory part. I'm working the little pieces. I think. And
then you're throwing the punch, and you're thinking about, is my weight, am I centered?
Right.
What does my arm feel like? Is it too far extended or not, right? And so you're not thinking necessarily about the kata anymore. You're practicing other little bits. Exactly that. So there's the done it pattern where, like, oh, I've done this. Here's how we fix it. Here, I've done this. I'll show you the answer. That's not really helping anybody. Again, it's not about solving the problem so much. It's about taking the tool and practicing with it. And finally, the hippo, that highest paid person, the senior person coming in and saying, no, you should be doing it this way, right? yeah, okay, well, again, we're not learning then. Maybe we're learning that you're always going to tell us what we should be doing, but we're not getting out of that production time when you tell us what to do and taking the time to be able to make mistakes. And yeah, you're probably right. You've got the experience, but let us make the mistakes and figure it out and see what we can come up with. Because maybe there's a different way now, that works better or not. So, anyhow, those are some issues. And then I always leave with the question of, what's standing in the way of your team spending production time to get better? What is it why aren't you guys doing it? If it's so important. And I hear managers often say like, oh yeah, well, we give them 10% time, or, they get 20% of the week or whatever, but are they really doing it? And if not, why not? Anyhow, that's what I got. That's the condensed version. I'm happy to talk about this a lot. I didn't put my Mastodon thing on there. The link goes to a GitHub account that I usually put all the resources on, so you can find them later as well. Okay. Thank you.
Paige, can you plug the URL for that resources link into the chat?
Yes. Give me a minute. How about that? So I'm going to stop sharing because so that you'll find that the slides are there, and they have a linkable like the URL is actually in the slides. Let me come over here and click that. Maybe there. Okay. No, let me go find it. A sec.
Oh, I see .md files. I just learned what those were a couple months ago.
Yeah, that's I saw, again, I was talking about my my friend, the coach Llewellyn Falco. He was doing this, and I was like, oh, that's excellent. Then I don't have to, then anytime I update it, anytime I change it, I can put the stuff up there, and people can get right to it. And the same with all the videos. I link to all the videos that that people do when I do talks, so that you can go back and watch them and see, well, what I got different or what I got wrong. Let's go here.
Brian, did you get to that URL for resources?
Yeah, I just did the
Can you plug it into the chat page?
I got it.
You got
right
it
there. There you
Oh,
go.
there it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Perfect.
I got to say that was a really, really good PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, well, thank you. It's yeah, I did changes at the last minute, which is always pretty pretty worrisome, but thank you very much. I also took a bunch out because it's usually I could go on for an hour and a half about
Sure.
this, and I wanted to make sure that I fit within the time box tonight, but thank you very much.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I would say that I got a few questions. I would just say, Ron, if we were already kind of in a small group, I'd say let's just open it up for some questions, discussion for as
Yeah.
as long as people have questions and Paige wants to answer them.
Sounds good.
And
All
I
right.
will use this time to politely duck out, so I don't do it in the middle of the discussion, because I got a thing at 6:30. But Paige, thank you very much for your time on this. Loved the deck, and Ron, thanks for setting it up. Nate, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
Absolutely, Scott.
I would love to connect and see more of these meetups, so I'll hopefully see you around. Right.
Thanks so much.
Super, Scott.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, Paige, thanks so much for doing this. I'm not an engineer, but I get this concept a lot. Brian and I are in the Air Force flying. All of these concepts ring true, right, to how we practice certain things. And
so Nate, I don't know if you were raised with the 54 commands, but in my ROTC days, we had to do 54 marching commands. of
Mm.
our little group of people, and and we had to learn all 54 of those commands and lead our little small squad across the parade field and practice and memorize and all that kind of stuff. It was just like, you just brought that back to me. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think having done that and done sports and stuff growing up, like it's when you get into an office world, you forget a lot of this stuff, right? You just assume that you're doing work. And it's I've also seen a struggle. Like, I mean, we talked about it before when you first jumped on, where a lot of times I'll see organizations where the engineering, we aren't listening to engineers as much as we should when we're engineering software. And so how do you how do you promote this internally, right? Like, what is your scenario is like, hey, you get brought in, or you're trying to promote a team to work, but on the flip side, you've got directors and business folks, and we're behind schedule, and there's releases that need to come up. Like, what how do you sell this?
I think yeah, it depends is that's the great answer, right? I think I usually try and sell it because is very important and very much part of your workday, right? And I just wrote a blog post not too long ago about switching gears and how you have to slow down a little bit to go faster, right? When you if you're in a car, stick shift, right? You want to go from second to third gear, you're tacking out. What do you have to do? You have to take your foot off the gas. You start to slow down. You have to put your foot on the clutch to engage that. You start to slow down more. You shift. The whole time you're shifting, the clutch is in. You're continuing to slow down, right? You shift into third. You let the clutch out, and you really slow down. And then you put your foot on the gas and you go faster, right? And oftentimes when I come into companies that especially the ones that are like, oh, we're so far behind, and oh my gosh, we just have to get stuff out, like they're tacking out in second gear already, right? They need to shift gears so that they can go faster and they can do the good work at a more rapid pace, but not a higher RPM. They're not, you can just push the gas and burn your guys out, or you can take the time to make them better, not just, make your developers better, make your processes better. You have to shift gears, and it's going to require you to slow down a little bit, but think about afterwards, then you go so much faster, right? And there's no magic words about this. Oftentimes we talk about, I'll bring in and I'll talk about, like, okay, look, we have our code base is really convoluted. It's really hard to understand what's going on. Let's go practice. I've got some good katas, whether it be, for instance, maybe Gilded Rose is one. Gilded Rose is this just horrible if-else tree of doom that's yucky, right? We'll go practice, and we'll practice refactoring that into something that's at least readable. And okay, we'll practice that. We'll do it a couple times. We'll come back. Let's look at some code and just see what did we do in Gilded Rose that maybe we can see here, right? And start to show the developers that aspect, and maybe the management as well, right? We're gonna work on this. Yes, it's gonna take 2 hours out of your week. 2 hours out of your week. How much is that? That's only 5% of your production time. In a 40-hour week, that's 5%, right? Can you give me 5% to make these developers better, to help them grow, and to make them, make your code base better?
Sure.
Right? If the answer is no, then you got a bigger problem than just being behind. Right. And
Yeah.
I mean, it gets to that, and I'm very passionate about it, and I start to get a little bit
Right.
very blunt about it. Like, this is important. This is important to your company.
Yeah.
Right. And if you like, we always talk about hiring, or I want to hire somebody senior and I want to hire somebody great. And, you know, I want to hire that rock star programmer. Great. That's fabulous. But there's not a lot of them out there.
Right.
And the ones that are out there, not a lot of them are the ones that you want. But what you really want to do is you want to grow the people from inside. You want them to be excited about being here. You want them to get better and stay at this company because, oh my gosh, I love this company. We get to go to work and I'm getting better and I'm learning and I'm doing good practices.
Right.
And that's where you get the rock star developer. This is like, there's no such thing as a 10x developer, right? Not in the sense that we'd like there to be. A 10x developer writes 10 times as much code, also writes 10 times as many bugs, right? But a real 10x developer that I'd love to see is one who brings everybody else up 10 times, right? And knows how to learn and grow and get everybody else to learn and grow with them, right? So how do I sell it? It's sort of like that. Like, get real rah and, you know, get out the pom-poms and
No, I mean, I just I have visions, and Brian being at Boeing, being on Boeing projects and having these sorts of conversations, you know, I mean,
all the time.
right. I mean, because it's and I, you know, my company focuses a lot on manufacturing and non-technical type, not tech first companies, and so we have a lot of these constraints with folks that don't really understand how software is written, right? It's a commodity and part of the cog and wheel process. And so yeah, so I think this is sorry, I'm going on a tangent here. Well, the thing I like about this thread is that you're also kind of changing the perception of what software development is, right? It's a skill set, it's a craft, it's not a commodity.
It's knowledge work.
Yeah, right.
Right. And with any skill, you know, we have to get better. We have to, we learn to grow. And just like I said, doctors, what if a doctor didn't practice?
Yeah.
Right. And yes, doctors do all the time, but they have to take classes. They have to learn. They have to continue to grow. And, you know, think about like the flight crew. They practice all the time. Right? You don't really see it, but they practice because the minute that something's happening, they want to move from that slow brain to their fast brain, right? They want to just suddenly be wherever they should be going and go like, how did I get to the back of the airplane so quick with this life vest? Right. But that's why we practice, you know, and yes, maybe writing code isn't life or death in terms of like an airplane, you know, situation, but you know, you really want, I didn't really show the Sparrow decks. I love the Sparrow decks. They're really excellent and worth checking out. The whole idea is that they don't really teach you to see bad code or whatever. They teach your brain to look at code and go, something's weird there. Right? This is the practice. It's not like, oh, that's too long, or oh, that's really convoluted. It's just, something's weird there. Right? We're moving that from the slow brain of thinking about the logic of the code to the fast brain of that something odd. Maybe we should look at that.
So I did want to point out a couple of days ago in the Wall Street Journal, there was a really good article, and it was entitled "Try Hard, but Not That Hard. 85% is the magic number for productivity." And it was just, I mean, you know, for how many years have we heard, I'm 100%, you know, the right stuff. I'm 110%. And it was like, no, you actually want to be 85% for the maximum productivity.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably, you know, I didn't read it. I'll go check it out because it's probably along that whole idea of having slack, right? Having that slack in our ability in our workplace allows us to do things that the non-work stuff, the learning time, the fiddling around, like, oh, I wonder if I can write this in Rust, and then going like, oh, I really can. We could use this here. So many times in our learning times, we've found stuff like, hey, I wonder if we could, like, let's learn about let's practice writing an Alexa skill, right? Like, oh, that wasn't that easy. Let's do it again next time. And then slowly it was like, we could use this here. This could be a product for our company that people could use Alexa to ask about their, account status, right? But things like that come out of learning and that slack time and being able to kind of just, not goof around. I used to say we could learn anything we wanted, probably not water skiing because that wouldn't go over well, but anything else we could learn, on company time. Honestly, we probably could have learned water skiing, but nobody really wanted to at the time. Yeah. But giving that time to learn and to grow and to practice and to figure things out and try new things and be able to make mistakes is the really big one.
Yep.
Like, yeah, that's where the magic happens in terms of innovation.
And as a manager, I try to make sure that I really do try to preach the fact that take some of this time to do some learning and do whatever. And it's like, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, this software release needs to get out this day or whatever. I'm like, I actually really try to be very deliberate about saying, nope, that can wait. Take the time you need to do some learning, because that'll be, better in the long run.
Yeah. And I think that's good. That's good. I'm going to yes and something that I would highly recommend is don't just give them your employees, your team members, the ability to, don't just say, okay, you know what, everybody gets 2 hours a week to learn something, because it often happens for a week or two and then it goes away.
Yeah.
What you really want to try and do is put it on their calendar, make everybody responsible for it. You don't have to say like, you didn't do your 2 weeks, you're fired, or your 2 hours, you're fired, but maybe every day or every Monday for the first 2 hours is learning time, and everybody's expected to be doing it, except for maybe the person on call, whatever. But
right.
But it's on the calendar, it's blocked off. This is how important it is. It's blocked off, and we're not scheduling meetings over it, and you're not expected to be doing anything but getting better and helping the company get better.
Yep, I agree.
So, you've mentioned 2 hours a week a couple of times, in the consulting realm where I'm talking, and if this topic comes up, is that like, what do you have a standard, or do you have a recommended allocation, or like, how do you set up a new team? Let's say that, hey, like I want to implement a practice regimen. How much do you start at? Where do you
Depends
go
on what
with?
I can get away with. Really, I mean, it's like 2 hours is an easy sell because 0.5 or 5% of the time sounds really small.
Yeah.
Even 10% of the 10% sounds, oh my gosh, yeah, we could do 10%, right up until I tell them that it's 4 hours, and then they're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah,
But
right.
2 hours, we could do that. That's a terrible meeting. We could skip that terrible meeting and learn something, right? So usually I'll start out like maybe a kata twice a week, an hour a day, 2 times a week.
Okay.
Right. And how did that go? Was that good? Shall we try more? There are a couple places, Hunter Industries in California, they make industrial, like sprinklers, lawn sprinklers and that sort of thing, farm equipment. They do an hour every day when they come in. The very first thing they do is an hour of learning as like the entire department. When I was at Primera Blue Cross in Montlake Terrace, we started out with just an hour or twice a week, and we actually decided that on Monday mornings for the first 3 hours we were going to do a learning time. We made it an open space where everybody like come up and say what you want to work on, and we'll break into groups and we'll go learn and we'll come back and talk about it. Right. And you know, it seems like a lot when I say like, wow, 3 hours plus you were doing katas twice a week. That's like 5 hours a week of learning. But we got things out of it that made our code better and made our team better and made products. I was talking about the Alexa skill that was totally there. Right. And it was something that the company sold, you know, like innovation came out of it. And then there were other, you know, sort of unintended consequences. We had product managers who were trying to get stuff on the board for us by our 8 a.m. Monday morning meeting. And we were like, oh no, we're gonna learn from 9 to noon. So our first meeting is going to be at 1 o'clock after lunch. Well, then they had all morning to discuss what they wanted to work on for the day and put on the board for us, you know, right? So it opened up time for them. They didn't have to rush.
Yeah.
And the stuff we learned, hey, let's figure out how to write a command pattern around this object that we've been sort of figuring out. Like we can use that for the rest of the week. We can incorporate that into our code. Right. So, I don't even know what your question was. I just got going.
Yeah,
but,
no,
you know,
you answered it, which is, you know, which is, you know, where do you start? And I think, you know, 5% is a good place to start. But then when you see and you start to see the value of it, then it becomes more. And, you know, from a agile development perspective, right? I mean, we spend time doing retrospectives, you know, and things come up where, you know, the topics for what to practice are kind of baked in almost, right? So
yeah, I would almost, I'm always hesitant to like let the team decide what they want to learn. You know, you could give them some examples, some ideas if you're kind of coaching them and getting them started.
Yeah.
But you know, it's not practice when the boss says, you guys are going to learn about for loops today. Right. You know, like, oh, I don't want to do that, you know, or you guys, you know, like, fine, put that theme out there. Like, I'd really like it to pertain to maybe work that we're doing or gonna do, or something that you think might be interesting to the company. That I'd like that, because that would, you know, help me justify it to other people outside of this team.
Yeah.
But if it makes you better and you're growing and it makes our code better and it makes our processes better, then I'm not going to tell you it has to be about OAuth, which is what we're working on right now.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Right. Well, Ron, do you have anything else? Brian, did you have any other follow-ups?
No, I can't really think of anything right now.
My only comment is to thank Paige for that rejiggering to focus on managers and to focus on not just the teams. So Paige, you know, I thought when I heard you give this earlier for programmers, I thought it was brilliant. And it had just a little bit of a nugget of managerial wisdom in it, and you've really brought that out. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good.
And I'll also say I've had more than one person reach out and ask if this is recorded. They're very, you know, interested in this topic. So yeah, we'll get that out. And you know, I really do appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you as well. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
I think that's a wrap for this one.
Cool.
Thanks,
All right.
Nate. Thanks, Ron. Good seeing you guys. And sorry I couldn't get my video up. I don't know why. It's
okay.
On my iPad. Couldn't figure it out.
No problem.
Next time.
All right. Take it easy.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.